What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to another video. Still in Bali, believe it or not, hence the sun at this late time of the year, definitely not in England. I'm here at CrossFit Seminyak, and today I want to talk to people prepping for the Royal Marines or any part of the military, or in fact serving in any part of the military, and to hybrid athletes. And today I want to talk about core training. There are a couple of things I want to speak about, three specifically. The first one is how to implement core training into your weekly routine and what exactly it should look like in terms of what we need to do and the movement patterns that we need to hit. The second one is the kind of exercises and variations, regressions, progressions that are available for these movement patterns, the specific exercises that we need to be doing. And the third thing is basically how to implement it into your program, whether or not they need their own session, whether or not they should be kind of linked in to some of your other sessions, the frequency of which we should hit it, the volume at which we need to hit either per session, at a time, weekly, etc. This is all the stuff that we are going to be talking about today. Weirdly, starting with point 3, I can actually start to answer a little bit of that now. I do not believe, nor have I ever believed, that core training in and of itself should basically have its own session in the week. I think you'd be overloading those muscles, and first and foremost, they are like a stability, kind of endurance-based collective to keep your trunk and your torso nice and strong. So I do not believe that abs or core should have its own training in the week. I believe that core training should be interspersed through the week in and amongst the rest of the sessions that you do. I'm actually doing a lower body session today. So what I'm going to do is give you a really good kind of demo example of how to implement core training in. And I'm basically going to do a big compound exercises, and then I'm going to be doing a core exercise that then follows it. So basically throwing in a core exercise either at the end of a superset or the third exercise in a tricep. There are 4 primary movement patterns that need to be hit when it comes to core training. They are flexion, which is what we probably think of when we think about abs or core training, crunches and that kind of thing. There is lateral flexion, there is rotation, and there is extension. Do not forget that. That is still part of the kind of the that chain, that collective of muscles that keeps our trunk and our torso nice and strong and stable. But a big thing that I have with those 4, and something that hopefully some people are at least wondering, is how much movement versus counter movement should there be. So as an example, a crunch or a butterfly sit-up or something, for those of you that kind of do CrossFit, is an example of a movement exercise for flexion, and a plank, or like kind of an inverted plank with your feet hooked onto a GHD, that is an example of a counter movement exercise for flexion. I'm actually using the GHD now in a little hinge superset. So what I'm going to do now is show you how I would implement 2 different core exercises into the end of that. So normally I'd only do 1, but I want to show you as many as I can today. So I'm going to do a moving flexion exercise, and I'm going to do a counter movement flexion exercise. Check this out. Knee raises, 45-degree knee raises, straight leg raises done. That is the moving one. Now, moving on to the counter movement exercise for flexion. I'm gonna get back on the GHD and show you something a little bit spicy. Basically, feet hooked in, but torso facing the ceiling at this point. Elongate the spine and then hold it in that position from there. That is basically variation 1. Variation 2, if you can, is to basically put or press your arms back behind you. And then variation 3 is to have a nice light weight plate or dumbbell, keeping the torso in exactly the same position and pushing it back from there. Check this out. So now moving on to our second movement pattern for core training, and we are moving into rotation. Once again, what I'll do is I'll show you a moving rotational exercise and a counter movement rotational exercise. One of them, once again, is going to be on the GHD because it's a phenomenal flipping bit of kit when you're using that kind of inverted position way. and the other one is just going to be using a resistance band. So one moving, one counter movement. Let's see what I have in store for you. So that is spinal flexion done, both movement and counter movement. That is rotation done, both movement and counter movement. And now what we are going to be doing is moving on to lateral flexion. I forgot then. I'm still jet lagged, getting used to the heat. Give me a break. So moving on to lateral flexion now. That is basically this little turn here. So one movement exercise is basically kind of a side crunch. I actually am a big fan of either keeping the hand on the head or straight over, probably straight over. So one dumbbell in the hand, which you'll see in a minute. But as soon as you put the hand on the head, you start pulling your head and your neck. So that doesn't work particularly well. So as you're about to see, what I'm going to be doing is keeping the weight in one hand. You see people with one kind of dumbbell in each hand, and it just completely cancels out everything. So basically a side crunch or a suitcase crunch is the movement methodology. The counter movement variation of this is either just a suitcase carry with one dumbbell or kettlebell in one hand, attempting to stay as neutral as possible, or something I'm a big fan of actually for strongman days is just misloaded carries. So you've got, because obviously if you've got 40 kilos in one hand and nothing in the other, you're not going to be able to keep your trunk nice and straight. But having something like a 40 and a 25 and attempting to stay as straight as possible, that is absolutely spot on. So let's see, I don't even know which one I'm going to choose yet, flipping heck. Let's find out in a minute. And as if by magic, I'm back home in my new place. Hope you enjoyed that, guys. Obviously, we covered flexion, both movement and counter movement. We covered the same for rotation, and we covered the same for lateral flexion. The fourth and final movement pattern that I mentioned at the beginning of the video was extension, and this absolutely is a paramount part of the core. One of the things I would say is this: if you are new to lifting, you should absolutely attempt to strengthen your spinal extensors, kind of in your lower back. And the way that I would advise that you do that is through isometric holds. But if you're doing something like a bent over row, the chances are that's exactly what you're working. It's basically an isometric hinge hold anyway, whilst your lats and your kind of pull levers are working. If you have been training for more than a year, which is 95% of the people watching this, I would imagine, then one of the things I would say is I don't think you need to add in more deliberate spinal extensor work. If you're doing deadlifts, if you're doing RDLs, if you're doing any kind of flipping loaded hinge or row variation, the chances are your spinal extensors are getting enough work anyway, and the last thing you want to do is overload them, A, so they become weaker in the times that you need them. Mopeds flipping everywhere. And B, basically it's going to tighten up, and that's the last thing you want, because they're going to tighten up. They'll force your hip flexors to kind of tighten up. Your pelvis gets pulled into this anterior tilted position, and then you're kind of screwed. So if you're new to lifting and new to training, which is probably only a handful of you, then do some holding positions with a kettlebell in each hand, and then do some rows from there. If not, and you've been lifting for a while, which I imagine is the vast flipping majority of you, then I genuinely think you don't need to do that. So there we go, guys. Movement and counter movement for, well, there are 4 main movement patterns that the core needs to do. Only 3 of them, in my opinion, need deliberate attention. I don't think the core needs its own isolated session. I think that for flexion, rotation, and lateral flexion, as long as you incorporate, one of those movement patterns through a session by bolting an exercise, either movement or counter movement, onto the end of a superset or a triset or something, then I think you're all gravy. I really hope you did enjoy that, guys. If you did, please do smash that like button. If you have not yet done so, make sure you subscribe for everything training, S&C, power stuff for hybrid athletes, military prep, travel, adventure, all of it. As always, guys, stay strong, stay healthy, stay awesome, and I will see you soon.